Untapped with ME, and I am ME. This series is about murder and beer. Yes, I'm going to open one right now. I tell true and crazy stories about murder and crime in Nacogdoches, Texas, and I drink beer while I tell the stories. That's the basic premise of the whole thing. We tell the story like we just told Blood in the Pines, the story of Khristian Philip James Oliver. So if you haven't seen that, go back, because this interview isn't going to mean as much if you haven't heard that story. But as always, we conclude the story talking to somebody who was there, y'all. This Jerry Poole, he a legendary courtroom reporter for Nacogdoches County, and there's very little that he doesn't know about these stories. So we get to hear all the things that Jerry has to say about the trial of Khristian Oliver. But first, Jerry, we got to get our drink on. So get that in the camera there. So no surprise. It's no surprise. It's Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, Dr. Pepper. Zero. No
Zero.
sugar.
Let's toast.
Right.
And I'm drinking a good old standby here. I think this is what I drank the last time I was over here. We're in Jerry's kitchen. Yeah, we real professional here, but we got everything we need. We got our camera, we got our drink, and we got some things to say.
Right.
Tell me about the first time you saw Khristian Oliver, and what were your impressions?
Well, of course, I think it was probably at an arraignment when he came in, and my impression mainly was he was so young. He was he was really well dressed. I mean, in the sense of his appearance, and I guess my thought was how can a young man this so young get involved in something that's so bad?
Goodness. So he was well dressed when you first saw him. He wasn't in his jail?
I don't remember. I say well dressed. I'm more he was well groomed. I don't think
well groomed.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. When you know more about his family, as you'll certainly learn when you listen to the vids, you'll realize why he would be so well groomed, being from that kind of family.
Yes.
Actually, the father being so famous, and so forth. How was this capital murder trial that different from others we have talked about?
Well,
Edward Otho Hagen's, we did that one. We did a Kenneth Palafox and Don Davis.
Yeah, those cases were under a previous law that did not require certain special issues that were submitted to a jury. And in this case, when it came under this new law, the jury in the punishment phase had to make three different findings, and one of them was a special issue that determined whether or not he committed the crime, and if he would commit future crimes of violence that would threaten society. That was the first question. And then the second question would be whether or not the defendant actually caused the death of the deceased, which the evidence completely showed that. And the third question, special issue, was to determine whether there was enough mitigating circumstances to warrant a life sentence rather than the death penalty. And in the former cases, the jury actually made a finding of guilt and then punishment of death penalty rather than life. And in this case, the jury, based upon their answers, the judge would, based upon the jury's three answers to the question, would make a determination whether or not the defendant would receive the death penalty. So basically, they had to answer all three of those special issues with the answer of yes, he did all of those three things. And once they did that, then the judge would make a finding, and he would assess the death penalty.
So that's a really interesting detail there, because a lot of times we say the jury sentenced him to, but really they're just answering the questions which lend itself to what the sentence is going to be, but the judge is the one who actually does the formal sentencing. That's right, and
that's an issue that's brought up during the jury selection with the jurors, because the defense attorney and the state's attorney asked them those specific questions about whether or not they could answer these three questions.
So apparently that jury didn't find those mitigating circumstances.
Right, and I think that basically dealt with the fact that there were so many cases during the punishment phase that were brought up, that were cases that were unadjudicated, meaning they had not been earlier found guilty, but the state had to prove them, each and every one of those cases, that he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And those were a rash of burglaries that occurred between Waco and Nacogdoches. And the state proved every one of those up, and the jury had to believe not each and every one of them, but they had to believe before they could find they were true that he did them, and they were proved beyond a reasonable doubt.
Why is it that the jury didn't hear about all of those crimes until the sentencing phase?
Okay.
So they didn't. Before that, they thought he had a clean record.
Right.
Because he didn't have a.
Right. And that's
he hadn't gotten in trouble.
Well, because they're not relevant to whether or not he committed this crime.
I see.
They're more relevant to whether or not he would commit acts of similar nature, or acts that would threaten society in the future. The second question of those three questions. And that's why the state had a burden of proof to prove those things, and they're not relevant as to the guilt innocence in the first part of the guilt innocence phase.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, when I talk to you, you know everything an attorney knows. We were talking
Not
before
really.
about how being a court reporter, you learned so much about the law. Yeah. Could have been, but you had a great career as a court reporter.
I did. I don't regret it.
You know, speaking of mitigating factors, and you talking about a Khristian looking so groomed, well met. You know, he was raised in a very fine family.
Yes. Yes.
We could talk a little bit about that, and that they were in court every day.
They were. You know, his Khristian's grandfather was the first black doctor in Waco, Texas, and he had a beautiful home there, and his parents actually lived in that home, and Khristian actually was staying in a smaller, I guess it was a mother-in-law house next to the house, and wasn't staying with his parents, and maybe that was a wrong decision on his parents' part, because he began to do things he shouldn't do. But yes, his parents, they showed up every day. I was really surprised that they didn't just stay in a hotel every night. They drove from Waco, which is probably 3.5, 4-hour drive, to Nacogdoches every day, and we started court at 9 o'clock, and we didn't recess till 5 or later. So they were very dedicated to their son, and his dad, was a mail carrier in Waco, and he was also a great artist. They kept talking about it, but I didn't really realize it until Mike DeGuerin brought it in, some of his artwork in during the punishment phase. His dad testified, and he brought some of his samples of his artwork, and I was very impressed with it. And his dad actually had a lot of his art was in Houston at a distributor there that he sold a lot of his art out of the place there in Houston, Texas.
So that was quite the shock to find out that his father was so famous.
Yeah.
And that they had so much and could do so much for Khristian. That's probably why they were able to hire Mike DeGuerin.
Yeah.
He was pretty famous back then. His brother Dick, also super famous. He represented David Koresh. Remember that? The brother did that. The guy who had the cult in Waco that burned up. But anywho, let's talk about Mike DeGuerin.
Okay.
Because we don't always have a lot of city attorneys like that, of that caliber, come down here. Yeah. And what were your impressions of him?
Well, I don't know how to say, but Mike was he was kind of a normal guy. I was expecting a lot more, flamboyancy and that kind of thing, but he wasn't. We talked a lot during recesses, and he was I thought it was interesting. He was interested in golf, and I love golf, and we talked golf all the time. And that was actually one of his questions in board ire. He would ask people their hobbies, and if somebody played golf, he would ask them what kind of clubs they used and what was their driver. And I asked him at the break. I said, "Why are you asking these people about their clubs?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I can tell if by what kind of club they're using, if they're being honest with me, if they're really truly good in golf or really interested in golf, they're going to have a better set of clubs." And so I thought, well, yeah, no, that's true.
Okay, but in my head right now, what I'm thinking is he is making reference to golf, which again, you need to go back and hear the story, but that swinging like a golf club is a big piece of this story.
Well, yeah, it is.
I don't think he should have been talking about golf.
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know, but Mike was he was a good lawyer. He had a hard case to try. And so you can second guess anything. Of course, Mike didn't use his last strike in the case, which he should have.
What does that mean? So during jury selection, each attorney has an opportunity to say, no, not that one. And that's a strike.
For any reason at all.
I don't even have to give you a reason. Just boom, out of one hand. That's a strike.
They can make challenges all they want based upon a person's opinion. If they have an opinion about a case and they feel like he's already guilty, then they can challenge him for cause, which they call it challenge for cause. And if they have an opinion, then they can get struck. They don't use up their free strike. They get 10 strikes, or 12 in a capital. But he got down to the last, and he had one more strike, but he didn't use it. And so basically, he waived his right to voice an appeal on that part of the jury makeup there, but it was a call that he made, and you can't blame him for it because he saw what was coming down the line, and there was people probably a lot worse, and if he had run out of strikes, he would have no reason to get rid of someone unless he could prove they had an opinion or some reason that the judge would grant a motion for cause. But he made that decision, a tactical decision, and you can't blame him for it. I mean, it's what it was. And
so it was a strategy. It wasn't like he just forgot.
Yeah, it was a strategy. It definitely was. And but like I say, it's the strategy that he used. He gave up a right of appeal on the jury. So, but it obviously didn't work. He didn't get what he wanted. So.
Well, speaking of that jury, I want you to explain why this jury selection was so long. I was telling Jerry, I went down to the courthouse and I had all the materials pulled for this trial. Your name at the bottom of every page, court reporter Jerry Poole, and most of what I was looking at were just transcripts from jury selection. 200 people.
It took 6 weeks to pick the jury. And,
why?
We normally in a jury selection we have the whole panel out in the audience, and you ask them general questions to the whole panel at a time. But in a capital murder case, you do what's called an individual jury selection, in that you bring one out at a time. You put them in the witness box and you question them just like a witness. And so you can ask them a lot more pointed questions rather than in front of the whole panel. And it just takes time. We had a basic set of questions that we started off with that you try to narrow the issues down to whether or not they have an opinion about certain issues. And if they don't, then you move on, and then you get into more broader type questions, and that just takes time. Sometimes you get a juror in there, and in 10 minutes they're gone. They have an opinion, or they don't believe in the death penalty. They couldn't answer any questions at all if it resulted in a death penalty, so they're gone. So and then there's some that takes a long. I mean, they take 2 or 3 hours on one juror.
Goodness gracious!
And I think at one point of this trial, if I remember, your dad was sick, and we had to bring in a visiting judge, a former Court of Criminal Appeals judge, came down and stayed for a few days. I can't remember the reason, but I think maybe your dad was sick. and he came and sat in. But it took 6 weeks, and I think a couple of weeks to try the case. But most cases rest upon if you're going to do a jury case, you start really trying the case when you start selecting the jury, because
that's an interesting statement.
Yeah.
Well, tell me what you mean by that.
Well, it's if you get the right jury makeup
Okay.
for your case, and when you look at that whole makeup of jury, a defense attorney only needs one. The state needs all 12 because he's got to convince all 12 beyond a reasonable doubt. But the defendant only has to convince one. There is a reasonable doubt. And if you don't get a unanimous decision, you get a mistrial.
Man, you explained that so well. Yeah, okay, that's something I never thought about.
Yeah.
All right. I was thinking about how those jurors, probably some of the testimony that was the most interesting for them was that of those brothers, the Rubal brothers, because they're going to tell the jury, this is what we saw happen.
Right.
And everybody wants to know, well, what happened out there to poor Joe Collins on Camp Tonkawa Road?
Right.
And those boys were there and saw a lot. That was Lonnie and Benny.
Right.
They were really young when it all happened. It was like, I think they were like 16 and 15, and then 16 and 17. Yeah, juveniles.
They were juveniles.
And then 16 and 17 when they testified.
Right.
And so I would like to know, you were there.
Mm-hmm.
What did you think about their testimony? What are your impressions of that moment when they came and told the story?
Well, as a whole, their testimony basically connected with all the other evidence. So it kind of linked everything together once they testified. Of course, one of them was with Oliver in the house. The other one was in the truck waiting with the girl, Sonia Reed, who was also they both were lookouts and waiting on Khristian Oliver, and I think Benny was the one.
Benny was in the truck.
Was in the truck. Yeah, Lonnie went inside, and he was the one that was shot. But yes, they of course they were certified to be adults. They were juveniles at the time, and we certified them to be adults, to be tried as adults, and of course they could face the death penalty too if the state had so chose to go that route. But being that they were so young, they basically had cut a deal with them that if you testify, we'll give you a 15-year sentence, whatever it was. I think it was 15.
10 and 5.
Oh, 10 and 5? Oh, I can't remember.
I just read it last week, so go ahead.
Okay, well, I thought it was 15.
Yeah.
10 and 5's, I don't know the difference. Probably the 5 was the one in the truck, the lookout. And
yeah, that's
10
right.
was
That's
in
exactly right.
That's
Yep.
probably right. But, they... Some defense attorneys were saying they were singing for their supper, but
yeah, of course you can't help but that someone would say that, right? Because they're looking at if they testify. Because like you explained to me, look, that plea deal is not a done thing.
No.
Until they have done what they are supposed to do. Yeah.
Because if they had pled their case out before, they could change their story and say they did everything and Oliver wasn't involved at all. So, but they seem to be very truthful to me, and like you say, you put it all together. Their evidence links everything up, and it was truthful.
I can't imagine what that was like for them. I mean, it's very intimidating to be in the courtroom, right? I mean, you don't see that because you're in there so much. But even me, just a little kid, I was in there all the time, and it's very intimidating. I can't imagine going to the witness box and literally they are the thing. I mean, they're going to say what happened. They're the ones that are going to pin it on Khristian Oliver. I would have thought they were very nervous. Were they in the county jail that whole time too while this was going on, or
the defendant?
No, those boys.
Oh yes, yes.
So they're in jail,
right.
and it just seems
Reed
like
was too. All the defendants were
yes,
in jail.
everybody.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
and she had something happen while she was in jail, but they're going to have to have the baby. She had the baby. But you have to watch the story to know what I'm talking about. But it's very interesting.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah. I know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to ask you, why didn't Khristian Oliver testify?
Well, It would be probably to his detriment because if he testified, he had to be subject to cross-examination by the state.
Yeah, right.
They have a right to question him too, and it would not be in his benefit to testify at all. You have to basically go on the advice of your lawyer, and in a case like this, the evidence was pretty overwhelming, and to him, it would just basically end up. Ask him what he was doing. They would ask him what he was doing out there. They probably have all the evidence that showed that he was there, and he couldn't explain all that.
No.
So it's best to sit and not say anything.
Yeah, but that probably makes him look bad.
Well, yeah, it would. Especially on the cross-examination, they would have killed him. It would have been no question about it.
Yeah.
So.
Now, so the thing happened, the trial happened, and so he's sentenced, and we can talk more about what that sentencing was in just a minute. But the next thing in my timeline is all this that happened about jury misconduct. Okay, I don't remember hearing anything about jury misconduct for any other trial in Nacogdoches County. So it had to do with jurors having Bibles in the jury room.
Yeah, we've had other cases of misconduct.
You have.
We have, and it resulted in mistrials because of the fact that somebody either talked to a juror outside the courtroom they weren't supposed to, or had some kind of a relationship with them while they were waiting to hear the case. And those things are brought to attention of the judge, and it's a mistrial. And,
now that mistrial, it means you're going to start over.
Means you start over. Picking
jury selection,
everything,
filing all the stuff in the clerk's office, preparations, deliberations.
Right.
You're typing it all over again.
Right.
And
in this case, they allege that the jury took something into the jury room against the instructions of the judge. The judge, when he instructs the jury, he tells them they can't look at any books, they cannot read any articles in the newspaper, you cannot listen to any TV or newscasts or anything like that. And supposedly the jurors used a Bible, which I think there's case law that says a juror can rely upon based on their religion. Of course, we live in the Bible Belt of East Texas.
Yeah, we do.
And everybody, probably a great percentage of people have faith, and they in a situation like this, you're talking about a man's life, and people don't realize how difficult it is until you're sitting in that box, and then you come to the realization that my answers are going to result in the death of someone. So it's pretty heart-wrenching and mind-boggling, and people don't actually realize that till they're in that position.
Oh, I bet.
And the courts found that there was nothing wrong with
yeah,
that.
so on appeal, it stood, right?
Right.
Because they felt that they didn't use the Bible to help them decide what to do, but more to make them feel better about what they did. Did I say that right?
Right, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the lay day involved in the murder, because there were 4 of them.
Right.
And we got Khristian Oliver, we got those 2 teens,
right,
and we've got the woman. And I'm going to tell you in the story how they all know each other, but that's in the story. Go back and watch. But about the woman, Sonia Fawn Reed, I'm just dying to know a little bit of your impressions about her. She was sentenced to 99 years.
Right, yeah.
And I didn't quite understand why what she did. You said she was a lookout just a minute ago. How did she wind up with 99 years, and what are your thoughts about her?
Well, she was not a juvenile.
Right. She was 25.
She was a full-grown.
She's a full-grown woman.
Adult, pregnant at the time. Yes. And she had been with Khristian Oliver, although she was married to another person that worked here in a company in Nacogdoches. And under the law of parties in Texas, you're just as equally guilty if you are the the getaway driver, the lookout, as the person who pulls the trigger. It's in Texas. It's called the law of parties. And so I'm sure the jury felt like that. Of course, they didn't seek the death penalty for her case. They only went strictly for a life without parole case. And I'm sure that was because they couldn't answer. They couldn't prove the 3 questions, special issues in the punishment phase. It's probably some mitigating situation in her life that would render the jury not being able to, find that answer in that question to be yes. So even though she didn't actually pull the trigger, she had a lot of culpability in the case as much as the defendant did.
Yeah, I think when our listeners go back and listen to the story, they'll better understand. I'm thinking about how she, where they were headed to when they stopped at Mr. Joe Collins' house to rob. They were headed, you may remember, to her friend's house to get some pot.
Oh yeah, but they had been doing that ever since Waco.
Right.
Yeah, he was known to been smoking pot, and that's why he lived in that other house at their home, because it was away from his mother and daddy, and he could do whatever he wanted to do. So.
And I didn't really mean to denigrate smoking pot that much, is to say, she's pregnant. And wanted some.
Yeah, I understand.
That's not looking too good for you. Maybe that's not worth 99 years. But I think what probably got them. Do you remember that when Khristian came back, he knocked on the door. Nobody was home. Okay, he confirmed that, right? So he comes back to the truck to get the bolt cutters because there was a padlock on the front door, right? And he says, "Which one of them do I take?" And he means those 2 boys.
Right.
And she says,
"Well, yeah,
take Lonnie."
Right.
I think that kind of, makes you more than just being a lookout.
Yeah, and plus she was, she was involved in all those unadjudicated cases that were proved up between Waco and Nacogdoches. All those burglaries that was 20-something, I recall. They proved up. It's quite
That's
a few.
A lot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When you heard that Khristian Oliver had been executed, what were you feeling? Do you remember that day?
Yeah, I do.
Because is that the only execution that you were a part of?
Yes, that is. Actually, the other cases never did. The only other one that was Kenneth Palafox, and he didn't get executed, but he committed suicide. But I had a couple of mixed feelings. I felt sorry for his parents. They were good people, but yet I understand he had committed a horrible crime, and I feel like the jury did that he was likely to commit those kind of offenses in the future if he was released. So you don't really think about it, but it's kind of I guess it's kind of like it's over situation. It's over.
I see. It's over.
It's over.
Yeah, right. Because all those years he was on death row for 11 years. All those years, it's just pending.
Right.
And you know that it's probably coming.
Right.
And to have that closure.
Yeah.
I don't know, but okay. It was stressful. Just really, this whole story is very stressful. The whole thing, and of course, what happened to poor Mr. Collins. Again, you got to go listen because it's really, really, really terrible, and it was so long, because of the jury selection. So I'm thinking that you and Daddy, as I like to call Judge Pierce, Daddy, I'm thinking y'all must have. I'm thinking you felt some anxiety about this case. Yeah. So tell me about it.
Well, I want to say one thing about the family there. Not only did the defendant's family there, but the Collins families were there every day also. And these people were hurt tremendously too. Yes. So and the Collins family were good people too. So I want to make sure that we don't leave them out.
Of course, I'm so glad you mentioned them. And yes, there's a lot of testimony about how much they loved their dad. They didn't. Some of them didn't live far from him. And in fact, Mr. Collins had been at the house of his son that day, and the son was maybe going to come over later that night. It was just obvious that he was very close to 4 boys and a daughter. And But your dad, I mean,
I mean, your dad's sort of like me. I mean, every day is just another case. I mean, yeah, and I realized this was a very high-profile case, and I did want to make sure that I was extra, but I always was extra careful to making sure I get the record right, because I knew that there's a person's life and liberty at stake. But I don't remember being stressful about cases. I mean, after so long, we did this for so. I mean, that was in the 90s, wasn't it?
1998, 1999.
Yeah. You know, I've been doing it since '72. When I first started, yes. You know, I was pretty stressful about every one of them, you know, when I first started. But, you know, it's just over time, it's just another day at the office.
Y'all were pretty seasoned.
And that's where your daddy was anyway.
Yeah.
He never stressed out.
Really?
No.
Never stressed out?
No, he never missed
Not
a beat.
even when a minute ago you told me a story about how some man in the courtroom had a gun.
No, and he didn't raise his voice. He didn't. I mean, it was just calm and cool and collected, you know. And he assessed him a fine and took his gun, you know, and he kept it.
It sounds like living with him.
Yeah.
Calm and collected, and you're grounded for 2 weeks.
He never lost his temper. He never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew when he was flustered on the bench. I could tell just being with him so much. But no, he was calm.
I always like to end a little bit with that, you know,
Yeah.
because of course I like to tell people I'm not some murder groupie. I mean, I'm doing this stuff. It's really a historical repository. These stories that we're telling, Jerry, because you know it's all related to my daddy, and so we're gonna find another story for next time.
Yeah.
I'm filling up my glass so we can toast here at the end. But I'm thinking, Jerry, do you want to do the story about the SFA student who murdered an SFA student on the SFA campus?
I think it's a good one. It's a case that involved a local girl from Douglas, and it happened on the campus of SFA, and it was very interesting, great detective work to figure out who this person was that committed this crime. And although she didn't die immediately, she eventually did. But yeah, it's a good case.
Okay, we're going to do that one.
All right.
That's next. So, as we like to say here, well, first, we like to say thank you, Jerry.
You're welcome.
And subscribe and follow and tap in to Untapped with ME.